Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another Constantia Nek Podcast, where we'll be talking all things Two Oceans Ultramarathon. Just a quick happy Valentine's Day for last Friday, for those of you who do celebrate that sort of thing. Shona, how was your Valentine's Day?
Dev, I'm a runner, and Saturday mornings are long run days, so no Valentine's Day for me. I'm quite selfish that way, runners. Running comes first, man. It's not about Valentine's Day. And I had to be in bed early for my long run on Saturday, so there were no festivities shared. We'll have the festivities after Oceans once we can really celebrate. How was
Nothing
your
like a
Valentine's Day, Dev?
Yeah, very good. I felt probably a bit more pressure than the training's been in itself. Nothing like a happy Valentine's energy bar to
Yeah.
to get you through the day.
I mean, to be fair, that's
Um,
probably a good Valentine's Day gift. So yeah,
Yeah, well, it would be for me running at least. Keep
yeah.
buying me energy bars and nutrition. Sean, yeah, just to I think get stuck in where we should be at the moment. Maybe if you just want to touch on that, maybe just to throw forward before we actually
Mm.
get into that. The main focus of today's episode and what we'll be talking about is how to really be thinking about pacing your runs and getting the pacing right, as well as walk strategies that potentially could come into it, and then really want to dig into injuries and illness and what you should be doing now around that as well. So, yeah, Sean, let's get started. Just again, as usual, where are we? What should we be thinking about at this phase of our training?
Yeah. So again, we'll break that up into two people or two groups essentially. So those who have qualified and those who haven't. So those who have qualified, and I mean qualified a while back, not recently, not qualified today, not qualified last week. We really are in our peak training phase. We're building the volume. We're making sure that we're extending some of our progressively, slowly extending some of our long runs, perhaps midweek long runs as well. And we're going to go into essentially some of the pacing stuff about that later. But yes, for overall, we're building volume. We're building some running strength, with perhaps climbing, doing some hill repeats, focusing on some strength training in your training. But yeah, that's for those who have already qualified. Those of you who have just qualified, so if you qualified this weekend, or you qualified today or last weekend, or you're coming up to qualifying next week, it's really, really, really key. And we mentioned this last week, but I'm just going to say it again because perhaps you didn't hear it last week, that you take some recovery from that marathon. When I say recovery, I know that people are like, oh, I took 2 days. No, guys, you ran a marathon hard. All right. Running marathons are hard. South Africans like to use marathons as stepping stones just because of our culture of our races. And it does take a lot of strain on the body. And so you want to ensure that your body recovers before we throw the body back into some heavy training again. You don't want to carry that accumulated fatigue into your next block of training, because that is really where we start risking injuries. All right, we're risking injuries, we're risking illness, and so we really want to ensure that we are taking some time off. And if for the most part, we recommend taking a week off of running. Okay. And if you come back on, let's say, the following Monday, the week after your recovery, and you are feeling a bit, you're still tired and heavy, maybe take some more time, maybe start with some light cross training. Yeah. So rather just ease back. Don't carry that. The next block of training is really, really important. So we don't want to be carrying any niggles. We want to be consistent. We want to make sure that we're getting the most out of that. So yeah. So those are where we should really be now. Perhaps just building up, looking at some running strength, so some hills, and perhaps some actual strength. And of course, if you have just run a marathon, you are recovering now.
Awesome. Showing into the pacing side of things. So I know a question we always get is, I can't run that slow. And I mean, we try and advocate for easy running, and I know we've tried to move away from the term running slowly and rather using the term running easy. But people are still going, that easy is just so slow for me. What do we need to be thinking about from a pacing point of view? Why is it so important? And maybe like what are we talking about? What is an easy pace?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that these runs are there so that we can build your aerobic engine. Okay, so we are not trying to prepare you in your long runs to run at your race pace so that you can finish the race. Okay, we're trying to essentially build on your aerobic engine. let me just dive into a little bit of that sort of physiology, right? It's essentially we have two main energy systems. Okay, one which is aerobic, one is anaerobic. They do not work like a light switch. You don't switch on from one and switch off from the other. Okay, we're utilizing both of those all the time. And so when we want to build the aerobic capacity, essentially, we want to train in a specific zone. That zone is wide, okay, and like I say, it's not a flick on, flick off sort of thing. It's a wide zone, and so when we're training in that zone, we can either train at the slightly faster end of that zone, or we can train at the slightly slower end of that zone, and you're going to get the same benefits whether you train on either end of that aerobic zone. Okay, so if you train at the slightly faster end of that zone, though, you're just going to constantly be putting so much damage on your muscles, on your joints. Well, not so much damage, but more damage than you would if you're training at the slightly easier end of or slower end of that zone. So it makes sense to train on the slightly slower end because you're getting the exact same benefit, guys. It's not that if you run faster and you run on the harder end of that zone that you're going to get fitter faster. You're just doing more damage. And so the goal of this is that we want to build this engine with less cost to your body, because what we want is that if you do a long run on a Sunday, as an example, I want you to train again on the Tuesday. And if you push yourself too hard in that long run, yes, you're going to get fitter as you would if you're running on the easier end, but you're just going to be putting more strain on your body and more cost on your body, so that then come your next session, you're actually going to be tired. So we really, really want to run our long runs and our easy runs easy, so that we can run our hard runs hard. Okay. And so we don't want to be killing ourselves in these sessions. Your long runs are just slightly slower than your race pace. Okay, so they're not at race pace. And then often I have people saying, well, how am I going to manage if I only did a 4-hour long run at just a little bit slower than my race pace? How am I going to manage 56? Just remember again that it's not about the one run. It's about putting layers and blocks on top of each other that build up. But the goal of the training sessions isn't to measure yourself or to hit yourself hard in those sessions and kill yourself. They're to build that aerobic system. So essentially playing a risk and reward. We want to push the system, but we want to have enough recovery and enough in the tank so that we can then do our hard runs hard as well.
Sharon, I'm glad that you just also made the note about you, so that you can run your hard runs hard enough, because I know when we start talking easy runs, a lot of people think, oh, you guys are only saying we must always run easy, and that's not necessarily what we're saying. There's always room for those intervals, obviously depending on the level of runner you're at as well, so that's really important to note. But when we are talking those hard runs, and should you be running or enabled to run those hard enough, what are we talking about pacing around the interval type sessions that we're doing at this phase at the moment? Are those an all-out kill yourself type of interval session?
No, they're not. And again, I don't know where this mantra comes from, right? Like that we need to run our hard runs hard, otherwise we're not getting fit, or we need to run our intervals harder, we're not getting, no pain, no gain, bleed out of your eyeballs. That's not effective training, again, because if you do those sessions at a maximum, I'm talking about our intervals, again, you're breaking yourself for your next session. And in actual fact, you're not even really working the right energy system or capacity that we're looking at. So no, they are not a maximal effort. Very often these are done between 90 to 95% of threshold. Perhaps some of the hills you might be doing, because that will be like longer runs, perhaps your steady states and so on, and your tempo runs. But when we're looking at hills, which is specific to what we need for oceans, yeah, you're probably running those at about 105% of threshold. That sounds like it's maximum. It's not, guys. Okay, your threshold, think about that as what you can sustain for 5 kilometers, and you're now going to be running for 2 minutes at about 105% of that. Okay, so if that makes sense. But again, an easy way just to look at this is, if you're rating your session out of 10, 0 being that you can do that session all day long, and 10 being that you feel like you want to die and you're bleeding out of your eyeballs, your intervals need to be run somewhere between a 7 and an 8. Okay, so they are not maximum, and they repetition. So you want to ensure that your first repetition is in line with your last repetition, so that you're not going out hard and really fading, and vice versa, starting too slow and speeding up. We want to have hard, sustained efforts done on top of each other. Again, the physiology really likes that. It doesn't like one hard effort. It's never just about that one hard run. And maybe, Dave, sorry, if I could just go back to the long runs, talking about a rate of perceived exertion. So if we're running our intervals around a 7 or 8, ideally your easy and your long run should be run somewhere between a 2 and a 4. Okay, so obviously everyone will respond differently. Some people always report slightly higher, but for the most part, that's where that needs to be. So it's just a nice way to kind of keep yourself in check with that. But yes, the intervals are definitely not done at max, and it's about building on top of each other and ensuring that you're getting a hard, sustained effort for all of them. Because if you go out and you run your 4 by 2 minute hills and you go do those max, I can assure you, A, you might land up with an injury. B, you are not going to be able to finish the set. And there's no use in that. And you're going to be broken for the session the next day.
Yeah, and definitely not achieving the set the way it was set out to, and sort of getting the desired effect from it.
Yeah.
Sean, at the risk of losing a lot of people here, walk run strategies. I'm not scared to say I'm a massive fan of walking, and I walk in a lot of races in my training runs, especially when the road goes up. How do we plan and strategize for, I mean, on race day, we're going to be walking. There's a lot of us that will be bringing it in. How do we plan around walk strategies and walk breaks in our training?
Yeah, I'm a massive advocate of walking. I'm tired of people looking at walking like a weakness. I like to tell people that walking is really your superpower. Okay, and unless you are Gert Steyn or Carlo Molinaro, you are going to take some walk breaks on the race day. All right, we don't run. We're just not their level. That's just not what we do. But a lot of runners who are also still going for a Sainsbury medal are taking a couple of walk breaks in their water at the water tables and in their nutrition. Okay, so the key thing here is that there's a sliding scale for this. If your name is Gert or Carla Molinaro, you are going to be walking less on race day. If your name is Shona Hendricks, you're going to be walking a lot more on race day. And so we really want to practice this now in our training, okay? Because again, people tell me, oh, no, I can't run that slowly. The thing is that on race day, you are going to take times where you are going to be needing some walking up, especially up those hills. Again, this podcast is called Constantia Nek. You are going to take some walk breaks up Constantia Nek. So practicing this in your long runs is absolutely key. Let me talk about that sliding scale that I mentioned. If you are a more advanced, faster runner, you maybe are taking a 60-second walk break, 45 second to 60-second walk break every 9 to 10 kilometers, perhaps only when you're taking in your nutrition. If you're more like me and you're running towards the back of the pack, you may be taking a 60 to 90-second walk break every perhaps 3 to 6 kilometers. And again, that varies, right? But the key thing here is that you do this in your training so that on race day, you get the feeling of what it's like to walk. On race day, I really recommend that you walk when you need to, right? So you don't necessarily have to stick to that 3 to 6 kilometers. So I don't want you to just go, oh, my walk break's only in 3Ks, but that's at the top of Constantia Nek. Use your walk breaks wisely, start them early and do them often. Really, we want to start walking before we need to. Okay. And again, as I mentioned, don't be scared of walking up the hills in your training and on race day. Those hills are hard and you're going to get to false chappies and you're going to be like, awesome, I'm at the top of chappies, and you're going to come around the corner and you're going to just see all the runners running up and it's going to break your heart and you're going to want to walk up there. And so use a run walk strategy and change that up for yourself. So instead of going every 3 kilometers, I often go run for 2 minutes, walk for 1 up the hill. So you can vary that, or lamppost to lamppost. Set yourself little goals, because on race day, that is going to be so valuable to you. So yeah, really, you want to make sure that we're walking early. And in our training, what I would recommend is that for training runs that are longer than 1 hour, they should always have walk intervals. That doesn't mean that after 1 hour we start running. So in a 3-hour run, you only start walking. That after a 3-hour run, after an hour, you only start walking after an hour. You essentially start walking from the get-go, because, guys, the reason I say that this is a superpower is what it does is it just takes off a little bit of that eccentric load on the muscles. It doesn't affect the muscles as much. It allows us to go further for longer. Okay. Try it in your next training run. Set yourself a goal. Say every 4Ks. It's a great time to then take in your nutrition. So between 4 to 6Ks, depending on the sort of runner that you are. And you go back and listen to the nutrition podcast that we've just done. And it's a great time to take in your nutrition, get in a walk break, and I promise you'll feel like you can go further for longer.
Awesome. Sean, injuries. I know, unfortunately, it's one of the sort of downsides to our sport and what we do. There's some runners that I've spoken to that are lucky, that have had long careers and have never been injured, which really impresses me how they get that right. But for a large part of us, those little nagging pains and niggling injuries do creep in.
Yeah.
How at this phase, when we know Oceans isn't too far down the road, what should we be doing? How do we start working and managing ourselves around injuries?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, great question, Devin. And the biggest mistake I see runners making in this phase is that they try to push through these. They're like, oh no, Shona said we're in our peak phase of training. I need to keep training. And that is possibly the biggest mistake you can make, because all you're going to do is you're going to carry that injury through this phase of training into the next phase of training, which is equally as important, and hopefully not, but sometimes into race day. And we know for a fact that if you start race day with a niggle, the likelihood of you finishing is very tough. Okay, it's yes, Oceans isn't perhaps as tough as something like Comrades for that, but yes, we know for the most part, if you start the race with an injury, it's very unlikely that you'll finish. So now is the time to sort these injuries out. Okay, so if you have a niggle, if you have something that's bothering you, rather take a day or two off now, and then get that sorted, rather than that becomes a chronic issue. Because very often the injuries from running are overuse injuries, right? So ITB, Achilles tendinopathies, hamstring concerns, very often these are just from too much load and not enough recovery. And so it's important that you rather take that time off now. I'd rather you take 2 days off now, then that becomes an absolute chronic concern, which then knocks you out of 2 weeks of training before race day. So let's sort these things out now. Make sure you go to a physio if you prefer a chiro. Make sure you go to a doctor. Make sure you get these things sorted out. Listen to your body. Okay. Make sure that if you are feeling this niggle and you start your run, adjust your plan if you need to. Okay. So if you're not feeling great and you have intervals and you have heels planned for that day and your Achilles is a little bit niggly, don't go and run heels. Maybe adjust that to an easy run. Okay. So those are really, really key. We just don't want to take these injuries forward with us. We want to arrive on race day fresh, and injury free. Okay. And very often I would far rather have someone arrive on race day slightly undercooked, but injury free. They are going to perform way better than someone who's come into this having done every single session, but is really carrying a very heavy injury. So listen to your body, speak to your physios, speak to your doctors. Make sure that you're doing the regular recovery things. We did a whole long episode a couple of episodes back on what kinds of recovery. Of course, you want to be focusing on sleep. You want to be focusing on your nutrition. You want to be focusing on your rest in your training. But again, things like massage and foam rolling. Go back to that episode and listen to that. I've just started going back for a sports massage. It was not fun. It was sore, but it's helpful. She got stuck into my glutes and my hip flexors, and I feel so much better. It just feels so much better to then tackle those next sessions. So really focus on that recovery. And a key thing here, for lack of us sounding like a broken record, strength training is going to be the thing that is going to help you with this. So if you are struggling with a niggle and you go to the physio, they're probably going to give you some exercises to do. Please do those exercises. And I just think the most important point here, guys, is just don't push through the pain.
When we talking just about pain, can we maybe just distinguish sort of that pain? I know people sort of feel stiff and that sort of thing, but just distinguish between pain and injury and where we actually should be concerned or where we maybe can keep going.
Yeah, excellent. Runners are the worst with this. Okay, there's so much glory in running around. Oh, I ran so hard and I'm so sore today. Oh, I'm going to carry on running. And it really drives me insane because one, guys, you're going to get injured, you're going to get a chronic injury, and really we want to run forever, right? I don't only want to run this year's Oceans, I want to run 10 Oceans. I want to get my blue number, so I want to run until I'm 60, 70, 80. So it's really, I think we need to drop this culture of pain as a medal. Okay, so that's the first thing. But Dev, your question is so key. So how do we know when we can run through pain or not? And I think we need to learn about our bodies and start distinguishing between pain, stiffness, and injury. Okay, so once you start understanding the difference between, maybe I'm just a little bit stiff from that string session, cool, then I'm going to adjust my plan. I'm not going to go do my intervals. I'm going to go do an easy run, and I'm going to put my intervals later in the week. Or no, this is really sore, this is painful, but it goes away, or this is an injury. Okay, I know those are two very hard things to distinguish. So I do have a general sort of thing that I like to use. If you have pain at night, so if you're struggling with your knee, and your knee or your Achilles or whatever it is sore at night while you're sleeping, no running. Get to the physio, get to the doctor, get that sorted out. Okay. If you have a little bit of discomfort at the beginning of your run, but it tends to stay the same level of discomfort, that's okay. I'm not advocating that you push through that, but generally you can finish your run, adjust your run away from an interval session. But I'd really recommend that you get that checked out. The fact that pain isn't, or discomfort isn't going away, is a slight red flag. Okay. If you have discomfort at the beginning of your run, but it dissipates, it gets a little bit better, you can continue that run, of course, because that is getting a little bit better. Still get that checked out. But if you have discomfort at the beginning of a run and it gets worse, that's, of course, a red flag to stop. So very often you'll know within the first 10 to 15 minutes of your run, this isn't getting better. You generally know that once it takes you like a K or two to get into the run, you know how you feel. So you're normally close enough to home. And here's another thing with runners is drop the ego. You're close enough to home, turn around and walk home. All right. So you're close enough where you can make that. Don't be a hero and try and push through that. It's really, really key to, if it gets worse, to stop. And the last thing here to mention, and I probably should have mentioned this first, is maybe start with a little bit of a warm-up, right? So a long walk, some dynamic stretches, you'll get a good feel for where the body is at and how limber it's feeling, whether that is, that is actually really sore, or no, that is DOMS, to then make a call on your run from there.
Fantastic. Sean, I know this time of year, I've got a couple of mates and my wife's just been sick as well. How do we feel around the illness? Is it something similar? Do we take the same approach?
Yeah, definitely. So lots of illness at the moment. And it's the same approach, guys. Pushing through that illness is not going to be healthy for you. There's a lot of evidence to show that if that is a viral infection, you can get more and more sick. And we want to look after our health, right? So no race is worth your health. And I know that is a hard thing to consider, but it really, really isn't. So if you are sick, if it's flu, whatever it is, really take a couple of days now. Get rid of that illness and then come back to training. Losing 1 or 2 days of training, guys, is not going to be the end of the world. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the one run that makes or breaks your race day. It's the blocks on top of each other. So if you go out and you're a bit sick and you're training, chances are you're probably not getting the best out of that session anyways. Rather just take a day or two off and come back into the training when you are symptom free. Okay, so aside from the high risk of myocarditis, etc., we really just want to get the best out of our training. And if we train while we are sick, we're just going to keep that illness around for much longer. Guys, you have to understand that when we're exercising, when we're running, there's a lot of things that's happening in the body. We've spoken about how the muscle fibers tear, but essentially there's systemic failure. And so the immune system takes a knock. That's the first thing to go when we're doing long runs. And so when we continue to just push through these sessions, your immune system is never getting an opportunity to get better and stronger. You just keep knocking yourself down. So take some time off, make sure that you recover, and then come back into the session. Again, I'd far rather you take 2 days than miss 2 weeks in the next block, which is also a really, really key phase. And very often, guys, those of you who have just run marathons and qualifiers, your immune system very often will be taking a massive knock now. So that recovery is really key, because you are now perhaps going to be, well, you're going to be tired from your run and you need that recovery, but you're perhaps also going to be sick. So it's really important to take that time. Let's take caution in and around trying not to get sick in the first place. I know that's not always possible, but ensure you have a multivitamin in your supplement range. I would recommend something that's got a bit of vitamin D, vitamin B, so D and B, and some zinc. It's really, I think that's a really good complement to your whole foods. If you are traveling, if you are moving around, I would suggest a mask. I know we're not in COVID times anymore, but let's stay away from people sneezing on you on airplanes and so on. And if you have kids, of course, I mean, I don't know how you stay away from the viruses that come back from nursery school and stuff, but just try and obviously mitigate as much of this as we can, because we want to stay healthy so that we can train over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to race day.
Yeah, Sean, just I think on a personal note, there's something I try also, like when you talk around travel and that, something obviously constantly washing hands and that, but I use a Bactroban ointment and actually just sort of rub that on the inside of my nose and my ears and that also, so that it just kind of tries to mitigate a little bit of the viruses and that. So I think just like little things like that, that's also worth, especially if you're a business person and you travel quite a lot.
Definitely. And just to mention this as well, my training partner and our friend Candace, who we do gym together. And one of the things we've noticed is, I mean, since COVID, people are not as conscious about these things as they used to be. The number of people who don't clean their mat afterwards is like, it's horrifying. So we've taken to cleaning our mats and things before we use them. And then as soon as we've finished with the free weights, putting a bit of hand sanitizer on, and really just going to wash our hands properly after the session before we go and have a coffee. So again, I just think those are things that are within our control. But yeah, Dev, I love that. That Bactroban idea. That's a brilliant one. Thanks for that.
Cool. Sean, the kind of last topic I want to touch on here, and this is something that can be quite big around our training and especially sort of the things around injuries and pushing through, are external pressures. I mean, everyone's got an opinion on your training and like has a comment, or everyone's an expert. How do we deal with that at this phase of our training when there's already so much anxiety on what we're doing and knowing race day is not far around the corner?
Yeah, it's huge. Humans are, I mean, that we are just like that. We compare ourselves all the time, and social media doesn't help. Strava doesn't help. So now you're always going to be comparing yourself, and then someone at the running club is going to come and say, well, why are you doing this? You should be doing this. But what you don't realize is that, Jack at the running club is actually running Comrades, and he's not racing Oceans, So I think the key thing here is to trust the journey that you are on, trust the training plan that you are on. And if you're following one of ours anyways, that's, everything that we're saying here is going to be true within the training plan. And so without saying ignore those people, just rather try and focus on what you are doing. Everyone is on their own journey. So, and everyone even on a Two Oceans journey is going to be on a different one. Some people would have already qualified. I still personally have to qualify. I know, Dev, you also have to qualify. So we are on very different plans to someone who has already qualified. So just note that. I think that is really, really key. And then this is absolutely important, is that if you're being coached by someone, or let's say you're being coached by us here at Coach Perry, just make sure that you're listening to one person. Okay. I'm not saying that I'm the expert. So if you are being coached by someone else, by all means, go ahead, listen to that person, but don't cherry pick the training and the advice to suit you, because as human beings, we'll always pick the stuff that we like. Dave, I don't like heel training, but if I hate heel repeats, so if I got to cherry pick that would not be in my plan, and that would be as detriment to my training. So definitely, if I'm not saying you have to listen to us in this podcast, but don't cherry pick the training. Find someone that you trust and listen to that one person. And if you're getting the external pressures, make sure that you just sort of drown that out a little bit. Trust your training and make sure that, you're really just, because trusting that training is going to be so good on race day. You're going to get to race day, you're going to be standing on that line and you're going to go, I did everything I could. I did everything that was in my control, as opposed to trying to cherry pick and move around. And And then just lastly on that, I think a little bit of a caution around training in groups and doing your long runs in groups. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't do it. I love training in a group. We're social people. We train in a group with mates as well, but it's just around sticking to your own pace, right? So very often we get carried away and we try to push, the pace to keep up with other people. But just have a deal with those guys who are perhaps a little bit faster, that they can come and fetch you. They run up, turn around, come back and fetch you. It's safer that way. You're training more specifically to where you are at. And I think everyone benefits from that. So if you are training in a group, I love it. It's definitely safer. It's more social. It's awesome. But try and stick to your own pace, especially where we've been talking around keeping those long and easy runs easy. Don't try and just, go and catch up with the guys in the front. Remember, you want to be able to have a proper conversation. So as if you're in a restaurant or a pub, you should be able to have that conversation, and so use that in your group runs to test yourself whether you're running easy enough.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this also becomes a little bit more difficult when you are in a relationship, when you have a spouse or a partner who's also training for something. And I know that can also become quite a challenge when you guys are at different levels. Again, trust, like Shona said, trust the process and the journey that you're on. It's not to say that you guys can't go out on a run together, but again, you need to be doing what's best for you or best for each other. Yeah. Sean, great information there, a lot to unpack. And to be quite honest, we really by no means trying to fearmonger anyone here. I know there's a lot here that could be a little bit daunting when we're talking injuries and illness and that, but it really is important stuff. So if you haven't got it all, go and listen to it again. Make sure you're taking notes. They really are important factors. We are getting into the meat of the training pretty soon. And the last thing we want is for you to be injured and not be able to make it to race day. As Shona says, the idea there is to line up on the start line injury-free as far as possible. Sean, as usual, thanks so much for your time and your expertise. Everyone, we will see you again in the next podcast. Take care.
Cheers, guys.